I'm taking the money back right now. All of it.
A simple plan.
And what kind of nonsense is this?
Simon Birch, Dark City. What do these three films have in common? There's something about each of them that either Roger or I, or maybe both of us, thinks is worthy of an Academy Award nomination. And lobbying Oscar voters to nominate deserving films and their creators is the purpose of this annual special show we call Memo to the Academy. I'm Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune.
And I'm Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times. And do we want to influence the Academy?
Yeah.
Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, two titans of cinematic review. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong, but always captivating. Your hosts Antonio of the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast and Justin Henson of the Movie Wire are here to take you back to the balcony. Welcome, everyone, to Back to the Balcony, a very special episode. We've got the Oscars coming up in a day or two, so Justin and I have decided to go back and look at the Siskel and Ebert 1999 Petition the Oscars episode, where they gave their picks of who they thought should be nominated for these Academy Awards. Now, the actual announcements hadn't been done yet. This was their ask of, hey, if we can plant the seed in the ear of Oscar voters, these would be our choices. And Justin picked out this particular year, and I'm going to let him explain why. Justin, why the 1999 Oscars?
So, one, I think this one was more of an emotional year for people that just really love film. I mean, 1999, this Oscar show really didn't scream uniqueness. There wasn't a lot of movies here that were nominated that really attracted an audience. I mean, you had a couple of favorites here, but the main thing to me, what really made this one special is it was the last Oscar show of the late Gene Siskel. And the Oscars aired about a month directly after his death. So it's one of almost a farewell to the movies that he loved. It's a farewell to the years and years of him picking his picks on the Oscars. So to me, this one means a lot because when we get into kind of the last few months of him reviewing films, we really got to see almost a different kind of Gene Siskel.
Yeah, I agree.
In the way, the way he really delivered his review, you can tell his commitment and you can really tell his love for film, even though we can physically see him struggle on screen. And to me, that is just dedication and a real passion for film. So I thought it was only right to kick off our first season with Gene Siskel's last memo to the Academy, because I think to the Academy itself, Whoopi Goldberg did a fantastic job sending him off with giving him one last thumbs up while hosting the show, which wasn't scripted. And it was almost frowned upon against the Academy because he wasn't really part of the film community, right? So, and I think it was a well done gesture by Whoopi. And I think it's for our show, if we're going to do an homage to Siskel and Ebert, this only seemed right to me.
Agreed. And, we're getting set for the Oscars. You dressed for the occasion. Very, very handsome. I dressed for the occasion. This is custom made designer by Amazon. $12 that I scrimped and saved for. They didn't sponsor me this year, unfortunately, but maybe next year if I seem to pull this off. But I think that this was a perfect year to start off with because this was the first year, at least for me, that I actually really cared about the films that were selected and felt emotional about the films that won. So I was 17 when most of these films came out, and I don't even think I was 18 yet by the time the Oscars aired. They aired before my birthday. And I was on vacation for spring break in Florida with my grandparents. And we actually saw Shakespeare in Love in the theater right before the Oscars, the day before, because it was the last film on the list that I hadn't seen. And I hated it. I was so just enraged by how much hype this movie was getting. And it even hurt me more when it beat Saving Private Ryan and Thin Red Line and Life is Beautiful for Best Picture. So I would say that this is the first year of awards where I was emotionally attached to the films, and it wasn't just pageantry like all the Oscars before it had. Like, you had your favorites, and really you just wanted to watch like the musical numbers or the comedy sketches or Billy Crystal be silly. Like, that's what the Oscars were for me. But this was the first year that I was invested, right? But I remember this episode that we're about to talk about, and I hadn't even thought about it or seen it since then. So it's been a good chunk of time since the events of this. So when you picked it, I'm like, oh, damn, I do remember that. And I do remember that some of the films they picked and some of the actors and actresses they picked, I hadn't even seen those movies yet until like they hit video stores. And now that I've seen all of them, well, most of them, oh, it really excites me, especially like what you said, that there is almost a humility to Gene's picks for this that completely contradict what we've been seeing for years of his reviews of all the films, especially ones that you and I have talked about highly on this one. There's films and performances on his list that essentially are synonymous with the ones that we've talked about that he hated. So where I did kind of talk trash a little bit a few episodes ago, where I said, I feel like secretly he might have liked that film, but he didn't want to tell the world he did. So he was extra critical on it because he felt he had like a credibility he had to uphold. And this was like a real kind of eye opener for me. Like, well, maybe he had some justification towards the end of like, I can just let people know that I like what I like, and I don't have to have any of these laurels around me that people have built up, right?
Yeah, and we can tell, and I think I even messaged you at one point of one of his picks. It was so odd, but it almost shines almost a beautiful end to Gene Siskel, where he almost puts down the barriers to really throw a couple ideas out there to the Academy that really just makes him feel a little bit more vulnerable.
Right.
Where it was like a curveball on a couple of these picks, and between both Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, to me, I think they had some brilliant picks in their mix, some of them, that really did excite me more than the nominations to a point. And I was a projectionist and a manager at a theater at the time of this Oscar season. I remember when you get a bunch of people that work in a theater passionate about movies. I mean, these conversations happen. And this was one, again, just like you, I got emotional over because I was upset on a lot of these films that got nominated to an extent. Some of them deserved it. Some of them are a little bit of a shock to me. Shakespeare in Love was a complete shock um, to me because I remember I had to screen this movie like 20 freaking times and I got sick of it. But there is so many good movies that came out this year that are all over the map when it comes to uniqueness that this Oscar nomination just seems so stale. And most of these nominees came out again, no shocker, back half of the year. And we had a lot of these fantastic films that didn't get nominated in the beginning half of the year. And it shows the power of what stays with the Academy and what stays with people voting on what gets nominated. So if I had to pick an Oscar year, this one would show a perfect example of strategic placing of film when it comes to putting a movie out to get that Oscar nomination. If they're not confident in getting the box office dollars, then they can hopefully bank on a nomination to gain those box office dollars. So that's the political piece of me when it comes to the Oscars, when it comes to this. But there's a lot of meaning here to this episode that really holds true to kind of just the love of passion. And we get more of that from this episode than we do to the Academy Awards that year.
100%. And before we get into the films, like, this is the one thing that I have to say about this particular year, and you almost nailed it exactly what I was going to say, is that of all the fascinating avant-garde films that came out in 1998, it was so insulting that when you came down to the Oscars, that your best pictures and even most of your performers in these categories were war films and period pieces, right? Elizabeth, Shakespeare in Love, Life is Beautiful, then Saving Private Ryan and Thin Red Line. Like, it was the year where it was like, are you kidding me right now? Like, we're going to put all of our weight behind these. Now, I am not a fan of the 10 Best Picture nominees that we've been doing for the last, 13 years now, I think, 12, 13 years. I like it that it was like the classic 4 or 5, but this also is a reason why I think they did extend the amount of nominees, is because you bottlenecked it if everyone was putting out a war film or a patriotic film or a period piece. And then films that really deserve that extra recognition just didn't have a chance, and I don't think we were even to the best animated film category yet, right? That was still a few years away. So this was a really interesting year where I think they really started to maybe deconstruct what the categories needed to be. And based off of the, let's say, petition picks that Roger and Gene did, it would make sense why. So how about we start off with how they started off with Best Actor. So the Best Actor nominees of the year were Roberto Benigni for Life is Beautiful, Tom Hanks for Private Ryan, Ian McKellen for Gods and Monsters, Nick Nolte for Affliction, and Ed Norton for American History X. All very good nominees. The year of Roberto Benigni was a little much for me because I was like, okay, I liked some of his Italian films, but I thought Life is Beautiful, as beautiful of a film as it was, it did have a lot of just his performance as a person and as a filmmaker in these award shows was almost theatrical, right? It seemed kind of like an inside play by the Academy to get some extra hype. He almost seemed like a hype man. So him winning in these categories, I thought was a little bit of like an inside job, almost like an industry plant. That is why I'm so fascinated by the picks that Gene and Roger did. So, first of all, let's start off with your critic. Who is the guy that he nominated for, please, Academy, make this guy a consideration?
So my pick was Ebert's pick was Bill Paxton from Simple Plan. So, and to me, again, the best actor category here, it's play by play. I mean, I get it. And Bill Paxton, when it comes to this simplistic story, and me and simplistic stories, I absolutely love them. To me, it makes a lot of sense because when you take a simplistic story, it's a lot for a major actor to really shine. There's not a lot to go up against. So when we take a lot of the nominees that we have, they do have to shine over special effects,
Yeah.
over situational pieces of history. They really do have to forte their acting skills, but at the same time, they do have that emotional element that's supported by what's going on in the background. So it's that emotional tug that really supports and amplifies that performance. You don't get that in a movie like Simple Plan because you're there acting, it's dialogue driven. And Simple Plan to me was a fantastic movie. And I do think Bill Paxton did a great job, but I don't know if I would necessarily agree that it was Oscar worthy because, again, even Roger and Siskel argue about this all the time with Al Pacino being nominated for Glengarry Glen Ross.
Mhm.
Is nobody else can do that role, but Gene says a lot of people can do that role. So to me, I would agree with that. There's numerous actors that could have done this, and I think done it a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, I love that role and I love that movie. I think where I get a little bit more sentimental about it is, they never gave any real artistic credit to Sam Raimi when he was doing horror films. And here he is doing like a studio drama, and they praise the direction and they praise the screenwriting. And they also say that, Billy Bob Thornton was definitely a consideration for Best Supporting Actor, and he's great in it. Like, that was pretty much the year after he had done Sling Blade, and now here he is, all slim, no longer, the larger Billy Bob that we knew in the early 90s. He got his nomination, so that part came true, but I don't think the movie works without Bill Paxton, and I don't think it works without Billy Bob Thornton. The connection that they two have and the tragic ending that film presents is what makes that movie so good, because There are some dry spots to it, like there are in most films, but the actors really hold it together. The actors and the director keep it from being almost like B movie fare, right? And it makes sense that Roger kind of likes it because that kind of is his cup of tea when done right. And he's really kind of giving credit to everyone, but using Bill Paxton as like the anchor to his argument.
Yeah, I can see that. And when it comes to a holistic movie, when it comes to the chemistry, and that's where it gets a little tricky when you actually go to the best actor category or the best actress category, is whether we're zeroing in on the actor or the chemistry between them,
Yeah.
because that's going to be the key point. It's almost like going up going up against special effects in the background where you really do have to compete. So the biggest challenge on picking a best actor, and I think both these critics do it extremely well, is to really zero in on the what made it special. And we'll get that a little bit in the supporting actor a little bit later in the show. But I would agree with that 100%.
So Gene's pick is extremely surprising, and I love it. I don't agree with it, but I love it. His pick was James Woods for John Carpenter's Vampires. Now, that's a guilty pleasure of mine. It's definitely like middle tier John Carpenter. And he says that. It's like, you don't have to like the movie if the performance is what's impressive. He and Roger have a back and forth about that. You know, he's like, I don't care about the movie. I don't care if the movie's that great. Like James Woods, the performance, that is great. It kind of goes against a lot of the things we've heard him say in the past. And like you said, that's part of the sentimental part about it, where he's like, I can let this, veil of pretentious critique go. Like, I don't have much time left, and I'm just going to show people that I can just love film and actors and performances for what they are and let go of this grouchy, grinchy, grumpy persona I've created over the last 20 years. So while I don't agree that James Woods could have been an Oscar nominee for this movie, I love the fact that Gene stood behind it. Like, it's a real kind of last little farewell and goodbye to the pretentiousness that he wore on his face.
Agree. And in fairness, this is one of the first adaptions that I've actually read before I even knew the movie came out, and I loved the book so much. And when the movie came out, it was on my top 10 for most disappointing adaptions.
Mhm.
So this movie I can't stand. But when I saw this pick come out of Gene's mouth, it was a WTF. But watching him explain it and just kind of, like you said, just kind of let the guard down, it it touched me a little bit because even though I hated the movie, watching Gene go over the why and just see him nominate in my eyes, a bad film, but zero in on that performance of James Woods and calls it an entertaining performance, not necessarily a award-winning performance, but an entertaining performance,
Right.
then it really shows a lot at that time, and it almost is enough to bring a tear to your eye to show him bring a horror movie of a vampire hunter um, to an Oscar show. So, I mean, letting the boundaries down. I mean, this one, even though I don't agree with it 110%, but I do appreciate him bringing it to the table because I think what a lot of people, when they bring their opinions to what should have been nominated, they are so scared of public opinion of
Right.
what they like, and it shouldn't matter because everybody's going to have different opinions. And this is a prime example of letting your guard down, not caring about what other people think of what's good and what's award winning to you. So, my hat's off with the movie pick and the bravery he had to actually air that comment on his show.
Now, for Best Actress, Jean brings Annabella Sciorra for What Dreams May Come. Now, that's a movie I don't like either, but I love the fact that he brought her as the petition nominee because I've always loved her. I mean, Whispers in the Dark is an underrated erotic thriller of the early 90s that just keeps getting overlooked. And she is literally good in everything. Jungle Fever, she's fantastic. And I think she really hit her pinnacle when she was Tony Soprano's mistress in like that third and fourth season and never really got the recognition that she should have. I think a lot of the time she just kind of got passed off as, oh, she's just like that B movie actress that makes these erotic thrillers, or if we need a girlfriend or a wife somewhere. Perfect example, Romeo is Bleeding. She's one of the best parts of that movie. Like, she acts right against Gary Oldman, who's always chewing scenery, right? And she calms him down. Like, she brings those scenes back to the real world where he can get a little just, embellished in his performance. So the fact that she never really got any nominations, the fact that he recognizes her performance in this, which is a great performance, and he even says, is like, you have this really grounded performance from her, and then you've got Robin Williams, who is known for just being so bombastic. Yeah, he tones it down for this movie, but he's still Robin Williams. Again, she's really great at bringing some grounding and foundation to a movie when her co-star is known for being a little bit more outlandish. So I loved that pick.
I loved it too because you take Robin Williams and even they bring up the visuals like we kind of talked about before is going against those two elements and still have a fantastic performance. It stands out, and even when the movie is done, there's a performance that kind of stays with you. And it's not about the visuals, it's not about Robin Williams, it's not about the chemistry, but it's a matter of her emotional scenes in this movie feel real. They're not artificial. You actually feel this almost even when she's silent, you feel the pain with her. So between the body language and the given dialogue, she's fantastic. So I 100% agree with this pick. I think it's a great pick, and I think um, even though I thought it was a good movie, given holistically, given the visuals, the performances, and kind of the sweetness of it, if I want to say it that way. I think it did a pretty decent job between the emotional elements and tying it all together. It's not a feel good movie by all means, but it is full of great performances that really do show true emotion that really did make me feel. So great pick.
Yeah. And before we move into Rogers, I just have to say that, like, there needs to be at least some validation for her in her performance of the 90s, because it came out just a couple years ago that one of the main reasons why she didn't get more work in the 90s was because of Harvey Weinstein. She was one of the infamous ones that was going to drop the dime on him, and he totally ruined her career. Hers, Mia Sorvino's. So when people wonder, like, oh, whatever happened to her? Like, that's what happened to her. So it is a nice little nod from, the critic of critics to say, hey, she deserves a place on this list. So how about Roger's pick?
So Ali Sheedy for High Art. So this one I don't agree with. So even though I can respect the performance of this one almost is too under the radar to me when it comes to um, just a memorable performance, because even watching this movie, I wasn't a huge fan of High Art, and it's one of those movies that, just kind of gets lost in time with me, and the performance even after watching it, I really didn't care for it. It really didn't stand out or shout out to me as something that's memorable. I would have much rather had like a Jane Horrocks and Little Voice come out, because I think that was a fantastic performance, and I
Yeah.
thought that was completely overlooked when it comes to that performance. So to me, that would have been a better pick. And honestly, I kind of, before I rewatched the show, I kind of thought that's what they were going to go, because I didn't remember this episode. I just
Mhm.
remember it was Gene's last, but I remember that this year, that one was to me the standout performance, and I could have sworn that would have been Roger's cup of tea.
Well, yeah, because it is very indie. It's avant-garde. I saw that at Sundance, and I have it on my shelf. Like, I do like that movie. It does have a place in my cinematic history, but also that was the time where, like, the year before we had Go Fish, and the year before that we had The Incredible Story of Two Girls in Love. Like, uh, queer cinema was really, really getting bigger. Like, it was in its infancy in the early 90s. This was like when it was really just, let's get as much queer cinema out there as possible. It's what made Rhoda Mitchell. Like, no one knew who Rhoda Mitchell was until this movie. And then she started getting role after role after role up until a few years ago, where it's like, where's Rhoda Mitchell? But Ali Sheedy's character in this is so against type for her, because we are so used to her playing the oddball or the bubbly girlfriend or the bubbly just weirdo in the movies. Breakfast Club, which they mention, War Games. What's the last one? We were talking about Short Circuit, how she's like my least favorite part of Short Circuit. And so having her come into this one playing like a very sedated, almost kind of stalker, creepy, uh, it's an uncomfortable character and it's an uncomfortable movie. So I think maybe he's looking about how she's playing so against type, and that's why he likes her performance. Because as a performance, it's fine, but it's not the best part of the movie. Rhoda Mitchell's the best part of that movie.
Yeah, and we look at that too, and that's the other challenging piece of it is typecasting of what we feel versus what they've done and what they're doing now. I'm
Right.
totally for challenging the range of a performance, but to me, that just it her placement in that role just seemed okay. So it's a little awkward, but at the same time, I'm not used to it. But what are you going to do with it? You're going to have to really change my mindset of what I've seen you in before, and I hate to typecast it that way, but at the same time when you get onto a screen, you have to convince. You have to convince based on your previous roles or in your current role that you are doing something different. You have to convince us of this character's dynamic. And that's where I think it was really missing because there's almost a sense of lack of confidence. I think like you said, she does a fine job, but this role requires a real hit the dirt running and just really shock the audience when it comes to what you can do. If you're going to challenge your range, just go all in with it. And I just didn't see all in with it.
So the next part that they do is they take turns with like mini things where they didn't really bring any of the big categories. They each had a pick for the subcategories: supporting actor and actress, art direction, and screenplay. So let's go ahead and start you with Roger's picks. His best supporting actress nomination was kind of interesting to me.
Yeah, this one's kind of out of left field with Emma Thompson from Primary Colors. And I'm not saying that this is a horrible pick, but at the same time, it's almost kind of what we just talked about. It's kind of an out of character for Emma Thompson to play kind of this role. And to do a satire, I think she does a decent job here. And based on the kind of the nominations we have in this category at this time, I think this one would have been the almost the Marissa Tomei from 93 as the
Oh
odd
yeah.
one out. So I think she does a great job stepping out of her zone, but I do think part of the success of that performance does lean heavily on John Travolta's character and the chemistry between it. So I think as an individual performance, I think it's great. I don't think she has a lot of dialogue to really work with, but she makes do with what she has. But I do think that this one really relies on the chemistry between the two to really have that performance stand out.
Agreed. Then his best supporting actor nomination.
Which this one was kind of a weird one to me too. It's Jeremy Davies from Saving Private Ryan. So now, to me, s- this one's kind of a touchy subject with me when it comes to a lot of war films and the amount of dialogue, the amount of performance. So this one, I think, again, given a war movie, I think he does a good job. But I think again, we lean into the situation of it, the body language of how we react. Does it really spotlight the emotion that's coming out of his mouth versus just bullets flying at him or bombs going off around him? So to me, I think it's a great performance to an extent when it comes to a war movie. Does it spotlight what he can really do? No, I think this was smart character direction from Spielberg, but I don't think that this is a standout performance. So this one, I do have to kind of disagree with Ebert on it. I think there was a lot of better performances this year, like Michael Clark Duncan in The Green Mile. I think that one would have been my pick. A subtle film that didn't get a lot of recognition, but that performance to me was one of the standout supporting roles of the year.
Well, and that was the other thing too, is that it was kind of like the Sean Connery Award that year, right? James Coburn got it for Affliction, and everyone kind of just said it was like a sympathy vote, or oh, he's an older guy, let him have it kind of vote, which I don't like to get behind the politics. That's why I'm not a big fan of award shows. But the fact that they did have Jeffrey Rush, Billy Bob Thornton, Ed Harris, and Robert Duvall all in that category, yeah, like that one seems a little bit rough. But I don't know. Like, if you're going to give Jeremy Davies that nomination, then you have to say that half that cast deserve it as well, because that was one of the best things about that movie were these supporting characters where they all just brought something very special. Personally, I think Adam Goldberg's performance is better than Jeremy Davies, but that's just my opinion.
100%. And I think this pick from Ebert was just a really out of kind of left field for me. I think it almost feels like he wanted to pick something good out of Saving Private Ryan, to really kind of spotlight on this show, or to make him right when it comes to nomination time. So I think they really wanted this list to really shine at something being added to the nominations. But that's just me speculating at this point. But to me, this definitely wasn't the best supporting role of the year.
So his next pick was a very interesting pick as well. Art direction was his next pick on this one.
This one, this was my year for this movie. This was my pick for this movie, which was Dark City. So I absolutely was rooting for Dark City this year. It was my favorite movie of 1998. And when it comes to a lot of these movies that really leaned a lot on CGI, a lot of spectacle scenery, Dark City was the odd man out because is extremely dark. And when we go to art direction, this is so easily missed because of how dark it is. When we think of art direction that really appeals to the Academy, you're looking at bright colors, beautiful scenery, something that really looks good when you're watching it on a TV set at home. This one, I think he nailed. There's no other movie that really captures the setting, the environment, and the visual style than Dark City. So
Yeah.
110% agree.
I mean, it was his pick for Best Picture. Like, this was his movie of the year. I love Dark City. It wasn't my favorite movie of the year, but I tell you what, I like it better than any of the Best Picture nominees that were on this list, 100%. And again, that's one of those films that now would have a shot of being a Best Picture nominee with our 10 Best Picture nominee categories, right?
Yeah, I mean, the 10 picture nominations are just ensuring that the audience have a movie in there to really have them
Yeah,
tune in and pick a favorite. I mean, it is what it is. So, but at the end of the day, it's still 5 that the Academy is going to vote for back in the
agreed,
yeah.
agreed. So the last thing that he did in his supplemental picks was Best Screenplay. How about that one?
Love it. Again, really far fetched. I think when he announced this film, there was no chance in hell this one was going to get nominated, unless to me it goes to that shock effect of like the Full Monty being nominated for like 4 Oscars, I think it was. But a terrific movie. It's Jack Kasdan with Zero Effect. So a fantastic movie, a brilliant screenplay, and it really has something that really doesn't rely on character direction from the director. It's really toned down to just the chemistry between Ben Stiller and Bill Pullman. And I really like the way the conversations are really written in this. It's real, it's bonkers, and it's engaging. So to me, this one was one of the good best screenplays of the year. So I love Zero
Yeah.
Effect.
I love it too. It was one of my favorite movies in the 90s. I already had covered it on the Cult-Worthy Classic or the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast. And, Nepo baby or not, Jake Kasdan was only 24 years old when he wrote and directed this movie. And he does it with the skill, and it was his, debut movie. He does it with a skill of like a seasoned professional. The mystery is good. The dialogue is good. The direction's right on point. And I'm not going to say that Bill Pullman deserved a Best Actor nomination, but it is my favorite Bill Pullman performance, hands down. So, yeah, that was definitely one of my favorites.
It's definitely one of Bill Pullman's most unique roles and almost unforgettable roles. So it's one that will be right up there and probably my top 2 performances of Bill Pullman.
I mean, to this day, my buddy and I still out of nowhere will say, Malgorium. All right, so now on to Gene's picks. So he did not do a screenplay. Instead, he did 2 supporting actors. And both of them, I think, are really intriguing. Now, I have never seen the film One True Thing. I just don't have a thing for Meryl Streep films, but I love William Hurt. I love him in The Doctor, and I love him in pretty much anything where he plays a enlightened person, right? So this role I didn't have a lot to tune in with because I hadn't seen the movie, but it's just a guy who I think got overlooked quite a bit in his career. And the fact that Gene had something for him that he made spots for two supporting actors, I think really speaks a lot to that. Have you seen One True Thing?
I have, and this one I'm not too far off. I think William Hurt gives a William Hurt performance. I think it almost feels like this role was written for his style. It was written for him, and I think it really let him crescendo what he does best, is which shows that kind of that subtle power in his delivery. So to me, I can kind of see it with One True Thing. So I'm not too far off with Gene on this. I think that one would have been a decent pick, but I think this one would have been one of those oddball picks to really throw in where it's a Meryl Streep movie. Were you
Right.
leaning on Meryl Streep? Or it would have raised some questions, I'm sure. But this one, I really do think that this one was written for him, and he knocked it out of the ballpark when it comes to his performance. So I think that was a good pick by Gene.
I'll have to put that on my list because it's one of the ones that I've never seen. But his other one, David Kelly for Waking Ned Divine, I love Waking Ned Divine. And again, kind of like the full Monty thing, where you're going with a performance and a film that doesn't really feel like it should be an Oscar nominee, but it's the quirkiness and the originality to it and the ambitious nature of David Kelly's performance. Like, yeah, he's naked running around in this movie and riding bicycles. Like, there also is that courage to perform that way. The other one that reminded me of that is when I forget his name, who Madness of King George. I forget the actor's name that was nominated. Nigel Hawthorne. When Nigel Hawthorne got the nomination for Madness of King George, very similar, where it's like, is it a performance that really shakes you, or is it one where this guy is just so free and so courageous with just letting go any kind of hesitations of exposing your body and exposing yourself as a person? Like that, to me, is worth a nomination and not just the typical, I can recite Shakespeare and I'm going to nail my iambic pentameter. That's where I think award shows are so just, ugh. It's hard to put a base level on stuff, right? Because one year you'll think that they have what their tone is, and then they'll throw it out the window the next year. So it's really hard to have any consistency in critique and opinion when it comes to award shows. That's why this list for 1998 is so interesting to me. But yeah, what are your thoughts on David Kelly?
The character was written bonkers. The character was written unique. And this, kudos to the casting director on this one, because this had to be a hard role to fill with the right amount of confidence in an actor. And I think David Kelly knocks it out of the ballpark because there's nothing really else to rely on when it comes to how you're performing this character. And it's not character direction, it's not necessarily the dialogue to it, but his mannerisms in this movie, the way he actually delivers it. It's it's quirky, it's fun, it's heartwarming. Um,
Yeah.
this character and the way he delivers, he nails every emotional element to it, where it's one that we have to watch eyes glued to the screen start to finish. So this was not only a memorable written character, but a memorable performance. And there is something to be said with how much bravery you have for this kind of role. So, I mean, there's a lot when it comes to this performance that should be nominated. But even though this one might not be the most popular choice when it comes to awards time of how it's going to react to people at home. But I think absolutely
Right.
another great pick.
I think if he was a bigger name, then maybe he would have had a chance. I mean, you got Jeffrey Rush in there, and Jeffrey Rush is that same kind of actor who is like, I'm going to let it all out. Like, I don't care. I have no conception of shame right now. I am just going to be this character. But he was a little bit bigger name, especially from Shine. So being a Best Supporting Actor nominee in this category actually makes sense. So now the next one for Best Supporting Actress, I love Ashley Judd, but I think Ashley Judd is very one note and everything, and I hate Simon Birch. I'm sorry. It's one of those movies where it's overly sentimental to a point of shame, right? Like it is really just a tearjerker to be a tearjerker. The story, the characters that they create are only there to, in my opinion, create false emotions of sympathy in you. Like it's not a movie that you're going to attach yourself to. It's I'm going to paint you the most cliche kind of heart gripping and and tear jerking film that I can give you. And so the fact that she's a part of this, I'm not a big fan of. Like I said, I like her in movies, but no, not for me.
It's complete Oscar bait on this one, but I don't
Yeah.
think the filmmakers intended this to be Oscar bait because I think they went into it with the intent of really trying to make the audience feel the need to cry from almost start to finish. So, Ashley Judd, I'm not a huge fan of Ashley Judd. I think she's done okay in her career. In
Yeah.
this role, I think she's fine. But again, the material, it just really is one dimensional with one intent to really get the audience to feel something. And I think to an extent, we see it sometimes in this movie where it feels really forced for in her performance to really try and shove these characters along and her performance along to really try and get to that emotional element. So to me, Simon Birch is a little artificial, even
A
though
little.
I'm being nice. So because it's hard to destroy a movie with it does have heart. It does have an emotional element to it. For what it does the job. But when it comes to any type of Oscar nomination, that's not the job that it's meant for. So to me, I don't think Simon Birch should have been anywhere near the Oscars.
Agreed. Now, the last thing he did for art direction was for Elizabeth. This was a great movie. It was the movie that brought Kate Blanchett to the world. And what I liked about this movie and its art direction is that even though it's a period piece, it did create like a darker, more ominous presence than what Shakespeare in Love did. It reminds me very much of the environment that we talked about in The Name of the Rose conversation, is that the environment and the art direction is almost a character itself, right? That constant just darkness and lights, playing with shadows and never feeling fully at ease. Her character is never at ease because everyone's out to get her. Well, you feel that in your environment. So I do like this for art direction, but can't beat Dark City, man. Like that was like perfect.
Yeah, it's hard for me to get on board with Elizabeth. I'm not dissing the movie. I thought it was a good movie. But again, when we have these set designs, it's almost a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy.
Yeah,
We've
yeah, yeah, yeah.
seen it before. And John Mayer, his direction, it's fine. It's eye-popping at times, but it's kind of the same of what I've told you in the past. It's once we see it, it just becomes blended and we get that it's like watching a fireworks show without music. So we'll watch a fireworks show, they're turning off the music, and now we're just watching fire in the sky. I get it. So I think they do a great job on the design, but there's no uniqueness to it. It's coming from designs from history, it's coming from other movies. He just makes it shinier. And again, the shadow usage and the light, absolutely, I agree 110% that the usage of that is executed properly here because it does take skill. I will say this when you have a lot of the color palettes that it has to really control those shadows and that lighting, I think that is a true skill if I were to pick a kind of a skill on this movie, it would be the lighting direction on this to really control what is being in the shot. So I think to that extent, it does a very good job.
Agreed. Now, on to their best pictures. So, Roger had an interesting take, and you kind of have two out there. So, I'm going to let you go ahead and cover that one.
Yeah, I mean, one I've already stated that I'm 100% on board with, which is Dark City. So, and I can keep praising this for another hour if I wanted to. If you haven't seen it, see it because it's a fantastic noir feel movie. But the other one, I think, was kind of the shocker that I think a lot of people thought were going to just sweep the Oscars at that time, if I remember correctly, which was Pleasantville, which was unique. It was beautifully made when it comes to the integration of colors versus black and white. But Pleasantville is almost like Barbie for us now back then. It was a very cliche story. It was trying to say something memorable in a very simplistic set. And I get the intent was simplistic, but it's almost too simplistic to really add any uniqueness because when we get down to it, the main appeal to it is a transformation between black and white and the moral lesson of doing something bad in a cultural society that's not used to integrating our habits. So to me, I think Pleasantville I liked to an extent, but at the same time, I think it still was too simplistic and it didn't really deliver the message to a complex level. It was very simplified of what it was trying to do. But I do think it did have great performances when it went up against these different technical aspects of the transferring between black and white. So I do think there was some great stuff in it. But I don't know if I fully expect it to be best picture material. But I think this one would have been the one to be the fan favorite if they put it in the nominations.
Well, I mean, it pisses me off that Joan Allen wasn't in the Best Supporting Actress category for that year. Like, that's the performance of that movie. But honestly, if I'm gonna watch a movie about people getting sucked into TV shows, I'm watching Stay Tuned, man.
I was going
I'm
to say,
watching
stay tuned.
Peter Hyams, 1992. I'm watching Stay Tuned. Okay, so Gene's pick, I absolutely loved. He picked Babe, Pig in the City. And to me, that's just as cool as saying Dark City, right? Babe Pig in the City is one of the most underrated sequels ever made. I think it's better than the original, and it's more ambitious than the original. So George Miller, who produced the first one but didn't direct it, he takes the reins in this one, and George Miller's all over the place. Like, it essentially, we're in an animal city, in an animal hotel. It's got great celebrity voices, and it's dark as hell. I mean, the piggy kills Mickey Rooney like 30 minutes into the movie. Spoilers. And then, like, you have to deal with, like, the ramifications of all these things that happen the rest of the time. And this is a kid's movie that adults are like, I'm in. Like, film bros are in. Like, this is a movie that people just, I think the masses did not support it as much as the first one, but people in the know thought, oh, this is a whole different kind of cinema that we're doing here. Is it best picture worthy? I don't know. But to me, again, I'll put it against any of those films that actually did get nominated this year, just like Dark City, just like Simple Plan. Like, most of these movies that we talked about, to me, I'm not saying are better, but they're not as Oscar baity as the ones that got nominated, right?
100%. And in fairness, if we went back to the original Babe, nobody would have thought that that would have gotten any Oscars, right? As a
Right?
kids movie. But you know what? Look how that turned out. But this one is almost like a zany Tim Burton-esque kind of craziness when it comes to its set design. It is. It's one of those that I think confused a lot of audiences where we go off the farm from the sweetness of Babe, and the marketing on this one didn't really explain what kind of movie this was going to be, and it was kind of a question mark if families wanted to go see this.
Right. It's like Return to Oz, right? It doesn't match the idea of what we think it is.
Yeah, and I think it would have been a mistake because even though there are elements in here that are completely dark, it's a beautiful dark. It's a beautifully shot film. And to me, I agree. I like this. I enjoyed this one a lot more than the original. The original was a sweet film, and I think it had some good performances and some good concepts to it. But this one is one of those sequels that when you go bigger and better, this is the one that does it right because it does it appropriately. It does it
Yeah.
with the characters in mind, and it never steers off course of that. It integrates all these characters into the settings that we see, and we utilize no fault in the characters of taking a step back. We don't de-evolve our characters because we have a bigger budget. So
Right.
I think this one is a great pick by Gene, and what a way to kind of end that show on a pick like this because it's not Saving Private Ryan. It's none of the ones that people thought it was going to be. It's Babe Pig in the City, and to me, that's just like vampires to a almost a family friendly level. This one, I think, really meant a lot to me because I love that movie too, and I don't always agree with Gene Siskel when it comes to Oscar time, even Roger Ebert. But this one, it's a great piece to land on.
Well, I think the part that really was the icing on the cake was that Roger agreed with him. And like right after he said, if I could go see Babe and the Pig in the City right now, I would. Like, so to have that last little, kind of confirmation between the two of them, it speaks volumes for like all the years of discourse and disagreements. The fact that this left field pick from Gene, Roger was like, absolutely, I'd go watch that right now. Like, it could have been my pick too. That was really, really cool.
It's almost like a nice handshake at the end or
It
a
is.
bow on the stage. So, and during this season of the show, you can tell Roger was going a little easy on Gene, and I think they got a little debate in between vampires, but at the same time, it is beautiful to see an agreement at the end of the show. It's just a sweet kiss to a legacy.
So we're going to help them finish off this episode because they did not have a category for best director that they picked. Now we're going to kind of see if we can think in the minds of Roger and Gene a little bit and think outside the box. So the nominees that year for best director were Terrence Malick for Thin Red Line, Roberto Benigni for Life is Beautiful, John Madden for Shakespeare in Love, Peter Weir, who was like the outside vote on this one for Truman Show, and of course, Steven Spielberg for Saving Private Ryan. So I'm going to go ahead and let you say who your best director pick would be for this. Please consider us nominations of the year. And I picked two just in case you picked mine, but let's hear yours first. I hope you did the same thing, but I'm gonna let you go first.
I picked three because
Oh, damn it.
But if I were to look into Roger's eyes, I mean, it would be no question that Alex Proyas of Dark City would have
Yeah.
been his best director. I mean, you put in Best Picture, Best Art Direction. Obviously, it has to go to the direction piece of it. That's a huge piece of it. And I really want to say my other one, but I am going to hold off till I hear yours because I'm curious now. But if you pick it, I'm going to be really upset.
Okay, well, you might know mine. I think there was a director this year that got really overlooked. The film got overlooked. The performances got overlooked, mostly because I think it went way over people's heads. And it was a film that everyone said could not be filmed. And that is Terry Gilliam for Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. That was my pick.
Oh, you got it. That was my next one. That was it. I also added for best screenplay as well, by the way.
Well, yeah, and that was a screenplay that was in development for years. Like Alex Cox was originally the one that was going to do it in the early 80s, and he still gets a writing credit on it too. So, just for fun, I'll tell you who my secondary pick was in case you picked Fear and Loathing, and that was Tom Tykwer for Run Lola Run, one of the most intense and I'm going to say frenetically kinetic directed film that I'd seen in many years. It was the first film that kind of blew my mind of like, we can essentially do almost like a real time movie and you are just going to be gripped with intensity the whole time that the plot's unfolding. And sadly, I don't think he's done as well with his other films. Like Perfume was good, Cloud Atlas is impressive, but not the best film. It's really hard to top Run Lola Run for him.
As I kind of review films, that kept popping in my head because it's a fantastic film. It's a unique film. And it's just directed almost to perfection given the unique concept it has. So I think that's a fantastic pick.
Yeah, I feel like the Safdie brothers owe Tom Tykwer a lot where how they pace their films. Like when I watch those movies, I'm like, oh, you're just doing Run Lola Run, which is fine because more people need to watch that movie.
And I think this could have really done better at the Academy Awards if there was two elements. It came out at the right time, and then the runtime didn't just not attract viewers to it because it does have an extremely short runtime. And to
Yeah.
have that as an award nomination, I think really steered audiences and the Academy in a wrong direction.
I think they need to go that direction now because movies are too damn long.
100%. And just if we were to make a new category, honestly, for the most impressive direction from a newcomer, I would just have to throw out because we haven't talked about it. American History X with Tony Kaye,
Mhm.
music video director, just kind of new first major motion picture. Out of all the movies, when it comes to his first major motion picture, I think that one was probably the most impressive from a music video director that I've seen in a while.
I agree, but also it did have all that controversy that Edward Norton himself, pretty much promoted on purpose that he directed half the movie. Like it was hard to say who was telling the truth. And I don't know. He does have a habit of taking over productions. So maybe it was just all the controversy of like, okay, well, who actually did it? who actually directed Poltergeist? Was it Tobe Hooper or was it Spielberg? It was one of those kind of things, right? But yeah, I agree. That movie, it still has its place in history. I mean, Norton got the nomination for actor, but that's one where it's like, I think I don't know enough about behind the scenes to give anyone a lot of credit.
I don't know if I trust Norton, but I'll trust IMDb on who's on the credits. So
Right.
I'm giving credit to the K on it.
Cool. Man, this was a lot of fun. We'll have to do it next year and pick another year. I guess I'll pick the year next year for the Oscars. But no, the sentimentality of this episode that they did is really, like I said, it's the icing on the cake to a long and impressive run of shows and discussions and films. And, you know, we have a podcast about these guys where it got people watching movies they probably weren't going to watch. But on the flip side, it probably left a lot of movies in the dust because they didn't say that they were great. And it was people like us who found them and dusted them off and talked about them on our podcast. But yeah, this was an amazing episode to watch, and this was a lot of fun to record.
I think, again, when we talk about how great these guys were, and this one, again, watch the movies that we've listed on it, because what I find very special, if you take out just a select few, most of these movies are still under the radar. They did really mean a lot to Gene and Roger. So again, they didn't get a lot of publicity. They were smaller movies, most of them. Take a watch, and again, find out why it meant so much to these fantastic critics.
100%. And the last thing I'll say is, if you haven't seen Dark City, watch the director's cut. It is better. It makes everything a lot more clear than if you watch a theatrical cut. I think that's one of the reasons why it had so much against it, is that the theatrical cut doesn't really make the story coherent where the director's cut does. I can only imagine if that cut had made it out, maybe we'd see a different lineup of films here.
That one, it kills me that didn't get more than what it deserved that year. And again, another under the radar. Watch that one 110%. That one was my favorite of that year.
Awesome. Well, everyone, thanks for joining us on this special bonus Oscars episode of Back to the Balcony. We'll get back to our regular programming next week. But as always, I'm Antonio of the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast with my co-host,
Justin Henson of the Movie Wire Podcast.
Don't forget to like, review, subscribe, share, talk about us. We're starting to see a little bit of banter on Twitter and in our YouTube shorts, so keep that up and get in the conversation. We'd love to hear from you. And with that, we'll see you next week.
See you next week.